Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Northern Spotlights with me, Terry McStay. I'm delighted that my guest is Julian Leighton, who, amongst other things, will be telling us about the huge role that a VW camper van can play in building a business.
Hi, I'm Julian Leighton. I co-founded a company called Orange Bus back in 2006, and I exited that about 4 years ago. No doubt that'll crop up in conversation at some point.
Lots of things will crop up in conversation. I think the first, Sophie, is the bleep machine fixed after Simon Donald's? Because it did need a bit of a refurbishment. Because I think the first time I met you was at a up night.
Yes,
years ago.
I had forgotten about that. Yeah.
It was, so for those of you who don't know, it's basically the opposite of most kind of talks where you're not talking about how brilliant you are and all your successes, It's all the things that went wrong.
Yeah,
which is quite unusual, but quite refreshing. I mean, how did you find that?
It's a really good format, actually.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. The other side of those sort of pitch nights almost, where you are very much promoting whatever you're doing or whatever, it can be a little bit formulaic. And I think with that one, it was very much encouraged to break the mold a little bit. I think it was being recorded, but I think that I was given the option as to whether or not I wanted that recording to be out there or not. And if I said if it wasn't, it allowed me to be a little bit freer. There was at least one thing that I said that could land me in court for libel probably. But it was nice to be able to tell those stories, because actually a lot of the time entrepreneurs and people who've been successful are really good at talking about everything that they did right. But we all make loads of mistakes and actually have things happen to us that were pretty appalling that you don't get to talk about. And I think I remember when we first started the company, we had a customer in London who I looked up to. He was really successful, kind of seemed to represent everything that we wanted. And I remember him telling me a story once about how they were on the verge of going out of business if they didn't get a check. If a customer didn't pay an invoice within 10 days.
Right.
And it just blew my mind, because I thought that was just us, that had those problems. I thought it was because we were doing something wrong. Yeah. And to see this guy who was like so successful talk openly about those problems. So we always tried after that to be as honest as possible. It's a lot easier once you've been through it and we've sold the business, and there's no real downside to admitting when things were difficult. You don't probably want to be talking about cash flow issues when you're still trying to run the business. That would be
or if you're in front of investors.
Yeah.
But there's a time and a place.
For sure, because I think we have a responsibility now to tell those stories honestly so that people can be prepared properly for their own journey.
Yeah, I think certainly those in the audience, like you, was like, oh, right, so it's not just us.
Yeah.
Even people as successful as you are have the same issues. Yeah. And I think people take a lot of comfort from that almost, don't they?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it was good. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here.
Yes, yeah.
So we'll get out all those things, but as always, we'll go back to the beginning. So everyone has one of these photos of them with their mum and dad outside the house.
Well, that's my nana and granddad. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So it's quite funny. What you asking me for this photo has done is it's encouraged me to ask both my mum and my dad for old photos.
Right.
Because they separated like 30 years ago. And so there isn't like a central library of family pictures. And it occurred to me that nobody's looking after them. And so I am I've just got a load off my dad. I've downloaded his entire iPhoto library to a hard drive, so that's safe. And I'm busy in the process of scanning in a whole bunch of his, and then we're hopefully going to try and upscale some of them because they all look a bit blurry. So it was quite nice to be prompted to do that. And my mum's given us a load as well. And so my dad's family were from County Durham, that's in Shildon, and my mum's were Blythe in Northumberland, where I was brought up. That one, I remember that well, that house, because there was an old guy who lived next door who used to give us, me and my sister, sweets and things. And my nana used to take them off us and say he was dirty and we couldn't eat him. But she used to look after him. She would take him food around and clean for him. And it turned out he was a multi-millionaire when he died. He left them not a lot of money, but they were very poor. So it was a life-changing amount of money, probably. So it's funny what memories you get from just one photo.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was County Durham, that's Shildon. My nana and granddad, my dad was one of 4 siblings. They lived in a 1 up, 1 down sort of house that you see at Beamish, mining cottage.
It's scary when you see the house you grew up in. In a museum, because it's getting close for me now.
They had no money. I had no idea how poor they were. We went to my uncle's funeral last year, and my auntie was talking about when they got their own toilet for the first time. And what she meant was the first outdoor toilet. She didn't mean indoor.
Oh, really?
They had to share previously. There was 3 toilets on the street of mining cottages.
Right. And
my dad said he used to just push the doors open and see which one was the cleanest. I mean, you can't believe that was 2 generations ago. It's just insane. No. So yeah, that was County Durham. We were brought in Blythe. My dad moved away from home when he was about 16. They were very much like I say mining family. And then, you could, if you got out of the mines, you tended to go and work for LNER on the railways. That was the ambition. My dad had got into grammar school and left at 16 and went and joined the ministry in Long Benton.
Oh yeah.
And he left home at 16. He was given a mentor or somebody that would look after him. Somebody met him off the train. Who worked for the civil service, and he was given a route into that as a lifetime job, which I guess he did have then, and he worked there until well into his 50s. So yeah, he moved out away from Durham. We ended up, I was brought up in Blythe until I was about 10, and it was a very typical northern kind of upbringing, really. Blythe was still thriving, still had a mine. So when I was little in the early 70s, it still had a strong mining community. I don't remember it being particularly hard place to grow up, but I look back on it now and it probably was. It's just you're not aware.
At the time, you don't think that.
No, and the summers were spent building dens and chucking stones at each other and making your own fun and all of those sort of stereotypical boyhood things that you do. But it was a great place to grow up, I have to be honest. And my aunties lived within 2 streets. My grandma lived with all the other old ladies in what I would now understand to be like a retirement flats, just up the road, and everything was within a few streets.
Because people didn't really move that far away,
no,
unless there was a real reason.
We never went anywhere. I mean, even like going. I remember we moved to Whitley Bay when I was 10, and my grandma. I mean, you think we were moving to the moon? Yeah. She was just devastated.
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
Yeah.
But my mum, in particular, was very ambitious, both for herself and for me. And my sister, so they moved to Whitley Bay so we could go to better schools. The school I went to in Blythe was horrendous and was closed down eventually. But yeah, really happy childhood. Really, no, I don't have anything other than happiness and fond memories. And I'm still in touch with some of my old friends. There's one in particular who now lives up on the Shetlands, I think, or Hebrides, somewhere up in Scotland. Very isolated. And he came back recently to watch Blythe Spartans. And I went with my dad and we had a couple of beers. And weirdly, I hadn't seen him for a long, long time. And I got some old photos out. And we actually had a video. My dad was quite entrepreneurial as well, and as well as my mum. And but he bought a video camera in what would have been the late 70s, early 80s maybe, right, where it was a massive thing. And he carried, the
battery was
the batteries were huge. Yeah. And he did that in videoed weddings. He was one of the first people to do it, yeah. And so he videoed our football match, our school football match when we were like under 9, playing on 11-a-side football pitch, as you did. And so we had video, like footage, video analysis of a school game, ridiculously. So I got some of that out and showed him, and it was amazing. I am really nostalgic, and I do tend to look back quite a lot, but always with fondness from my childhood. Yeah. No problems there at all.
Do you think that's where you got your kind of creative, or what inspired to some degree? Because presumably going down the pit wasn't on your
no, and neither was it of any of my friends' agendas really. I mean, by the time I probably got to an age where you're even thinking about what the future might look like, we'd moved out of Blythe when I was sort of 9 or 10. But I think Bates Pit shut, sometime around the end of the 70s. I can remember it being there, and then I can remember it not being there, but I can't remember being old enough to understand the impact that it had on the town. Yeah. I can remember all the marching bands and stuff like that, walking down the street. I can remember all of that sort of community stuff. And then, I'm aware when I look back on it now that it wasn't there anymore. But no, my mum and dad, my dad was, like I say, he was a civil servant and did did pretty well, through those ranks as they are. And my mum had her own businesses. So she'd started when she was 16. I think certainly in her late teens, she opened a boutique and made clothes. She told me she had a VAT scam. Should I say that? I think you only charge VAT on adults' clothes, and because it was mini skirts and mini dresses and things, the VAT man used to come and measure all the length of the dresses to make sure that, because you were selling them as if they were. Right. Well, it wasn't probably a scam. It was just the rule was written incorrectly, and they were taking advantage. Yeah. That's how we'll do it. Not a scam. And then her and my auntie opened a playgroup together when we were little. I guess probably as a means to an end. There wasn't one, so they opened one and ran it. They then had 2 coffee shops, a flower shop, and then ultimately a factory. They opened a contract packaging business. Right. So they were always very entrepreneurial. We weren't a working class family in that respect. Yeah. We worked hard. We had a lodger. It was kind of paycheck to paycheck as a kid. I remember that much. Yeah. But we weren't working class, blue collar, kind of on the tools kind of family. Yeah. We were probably the first generation out of that, I guess, on both sides of the family.
So for you, doing that for your career wasn't a strange thing. It was kind of almost...
It was always there. Yeah. Being entrepreneurial was always there. And like I say, my mum's was obvious when I look back because she started multiple businesses and was successful. My dad, he was also entrepreneurial. And I don't think I quite realised it until, again, you look back and think, he probably invested quite a lot of money buying a video camera back then. Yeah. And tried to make extra money doing that. He used to go and build wardrobes for people, and like on a Saturday to try and make a bit of extra money. They were always trying to do something to improve the situation that we're in. And I think me and my sister naturally were brought up with that in mind, for sure. Yeah.
But presumably at that age, you didn't really have any idea of what you wanted to go into.
No, I like drawing pictures, like collecting things. I've always been like a ridiculous collector of stuff, or a hoarder probably now. But I used to collect comics, and then I would trade comics. I did buy and sell. When my mum had the coffee shop, she used to go to, they used to sell like craft stuff, and I would go and buy key rings from the cash and carry and then sell them at school, things like that. So that was always in.
It was always there.
It was always there. Yeah, I've always wanted to buy and sell. Yeah. Always like that. Yeah. It's funny, isn't it, when you look back and you think,
where did it start?
Yeah, but it was always there. I don't think it was obviously learned.
Yeah.
But
the environment you're in has such a big impact, doesn't it? Without perhaps realising it.
Yeah.
And if you're surrounded by family members who are doing that, then it just
becomes normal,
doesn't it?
Yeah.
And not something strange.
And as a parent, I guess that's, now I have 4 kids, and that's what you try and do, is to try and instill just that anything's possible, actually. Yeah. I think that was the key thing, is that I never felt I couldn't do anything. I never felt that there was a ceiling. I never felt that I wasn't going to be able to achieve something. It was always, I felt that the world genuinely was there to be conquered if I wanted to, if I could be bothered, because I was also taught at a very young age that you had to work.
Yeah.
And we worked when my mum started the factory. So my uncle worked for Wilkinson Sword, my Uncle Gordon, in the warehouse. And Wilkinson Sword at the time was obviously the biggest producer of razor blades in the UK for sure. And they bought a new machine to put the razor blades in the little plastic things that you get them in now. So this will have been sometime, I'm crap at timelines, but maybe early 80s, probably early 80s. And he apparently, I think the story goes, he'd come home and he'd said that they'd invested all this money in this machine and nobody had worked out how to put the plastic, nobody thought about how to get the plastic things into the machine. And my dad invented a way of doing it. He built a wooden jig that you would put 100 of these things on, like that. And then he put a cardboard sleeve on that they provided, an elastic band around it, and that went in a pile. Right. And they then used them to load the machine with, rather than standing at the top of the machine, putting them in one by one. Yeah. So my mum and my auntie used that my dad drew a logo, which was, the company was called APS, Assembly and Packaging Services. It's still there. He drew a logo, which was the APSs on the side of a box, which might have been original then. There must be a million companies with that logo now. And then they kind of I guess they did have a company, but they hadn't done anything.
But almost accidentally.
Yeah. But they then approached Wilkinson Sword. And I can distinctly remember them sitting waiting for the telephone to ring to see if they'd got this contract. And they got it because the money they could save Wilkinson Sword was insane.
Yeah.
And we worked on that production line. I used to sit in front of the telly with a big, massive bag of these plastic things and a wooden jig and the cardboard things here and the elastic bands and just sit, and I could do it without looking. You felt them.
Yeah.
And I was earning.
Watching Green Hill or something.
Yeah, I mean, genuinely. And I was earning really good money doing that. Really good at 12.
What age would you be now?
12.
Wow.
13. I did it right until they lost that contract in my teens. You know, maybe 14, 15. So that was amazing. Yeah. And it really taught me that was my money at a really young age. You know, and my mum and dad didn't spoil. We were never spoiled. We didn't have a lot. In terms of material things. If you wanted something, you really had to go and work for it. So it was that. I did a car washing round. I would always find a way to make money because I liked stuff. Yeah. I've always liked stuff.
And that's a great thing to instill in your kids, isn't it? That work hard and you can achieve anything. There's no limit.
And it might sound a little bit corny, but I think it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
I really do. And it certainly worked for us, for sure.
So after your razor blade packing venture. So what was the first kind of thing that you got into? Yeah.
When the rave scene hit in the late 80s, we were too young to go to anything. So I was 15. I remember I went to Trax Records in Newcastle. No, not Trax, which was Scott and Scooby. Earlier than that, I went to Hitsville, USA. And I was looking for, I'd heard a track called Future, which was the first acid house track I ever heard, and it blew my mind. And I went to Hitsville and said, have you got this? It was an EP. Right. And they did all of it American imports. And the woman, who actually wasn't very nice to most people, but for whatever reason, she was nice to me on that day. I remember her being a bit like grumpy record shop owner, stereotypically. And she said, you don't want to buy that, buy Acid Tracks, like there was a compilation album, it's on it and you can have everything else. I've still got it. And it absolutely blew my mind. So I wanted to be able to go and experience those nights and I couldn't. So I started to organise under 18s raves, which were obviously reasonably sanitised. But not as sanitised as my parents thought. My cousin was a bouncer.
Because a lot of kids at 15 who had that problem would have went, oh, well.
Yeah.
But
well,
your response was not.
And also I was aware of, so, I mean, by then I was doing bits of artwork, graffiti and things. And we were designing flyers for actual raves, myself and some friends. So I was aware there was money to be made. My cousin was a bouncer at the Poly, and so her and a boyfriend came and did the door for me, and my friends DJ'd. We did live graffiti, and it was really successful. I mean, we made some money right up until I didn't. And this is the thing: is it was, you know, it was successful up until the point where I lost money on one, so I stopped doing it and did something else. But that was probably the first thing where I thought I could make some money without just selling my time. Yeah. So even though it was time involved, it was a different exchange to time for money. Yeah. And that was the first one where I thought I could really make some money here.
Yeah. So it was kind of a step up from just making things and selling them. Yeah. Because we've got this one of so was that from round about that?
So I was slightly later. So the graffiti thing became a big part of my life, both positively and negatively. And when I was 15, I was heavily into art, and I was very creative. I was kind of my sanctuary at school. My mum was very ambitious in terms of our schooling, and she wanted us to go to private school. I went out RGS, hated it. Never felt happy there. Really, she used to drop me off at the metro in colour coats, and I would wait for it to drive away, and I would just walk home. Really? And try and make it really hard for them to make me to go in for the first year or so.
What was it you didn't like about it? Did you just not feel it was for you?
Yeah, I didn't like. There was a lot of elitism. I think less than there is now. They did do assisted places, so we were on assisted place. I was on an assisted places scheme. There was a Labour government thing whereby if you couldn't afford to go to private school, if you were clever enough, they would pay some of the fees. And my views on private school now are I don't agree with them at all. And I believe you either tax them to death so all of that money goes into the state system, or just make state schools better. And if you stop taking all of the elite kids out of state schools, then state schools will have to get better because those parents will proactively make sure it happens. But anyway, that political broadcast over. I didn't like it. The art department was amazing because it was unbelievably well funded. So that was a real sanctuary, and I loved it in there. And they allowed me to do whatever I wanted.
Right.
So I did a lot of photography, still in a dark room. Loved all of that, and I was positively encouraged to do graffiti if I wanted to, which I don't. And to be fair, my parents both were very encouraging as well, which they might regret in the end. But my bedroom, all over the walls were covered. Everything I was allowed to do that, I was fine. Yeah. And
so they didn't see it as vandalism?
No, they didn't. They genuinely didn't. And actually, I just don't know how much they were aware of when it got out of hand, how much they knew what we were really doing and what we weren't. So, by the time I was 15, I was walking the train lines, looking for we just thought we were brightening the place up genuinely and making commuters' journeys better. I got away with it until I was just under 18. And we got caught maybe 6 months before my 18th birthday, maybe slightly even nearer. The problem was I got tried as an adult. Now, had I been tried as a child, it would have been a lot easier, but when I went to court, I got tried as an adult. We got caught. What they do is they come and raid your house.
Right.
For extra evidence to see, because obviously your defence is, I've never done it before, found the paint.
But there's 300 aerosol cans under your bed.
Yeah, and a lot of photos and designs and everything else. Yeah. And here's a story about privilege or however, getting away with stuff, if you like. But there was 4 of us got caught. And one of them was he had various things going on in his life. So he was kind of in the system already and went through a different kind of route. I think he was in court with us, but I don't remember the outcome of his, if I'm honest. 2 of the guys went to prison. One of them 18 months and one of them 12 months. So quite shocking, really.
They're pretty hefty sentences, aren't they?
Because you get charged for criminal damage, right? So it's the fact that it's art is irrelevant. It is if you paint something, it's the cost of the damage to that thing. And if you're doing trains, it's expensive. So the police went and raided the house. The police that arrested us, and I will be forever grateful to this policeman, really. And he went to the house, my mum spoke to him, said, look, they're decent kids, they're highly politicised, which we were. We were very anti-poll tax, which was a thing at the time, so we thought it was reasonable to paint that everywhere. And she tried to explain that we didn't belong in that system with prolific burglars, whatever. And he, for whatever reason, he took less evidence from my house.
Right.
He brought it back to the police station. He talked me through the interview. He nodded. He said when I had to say yes. And, so he brought stuff back, photos that were clearly from legal stuff as opposed to illegal. And then when the interview was over, he said, we'll release you. Because I've been in the police cell at the station for about 36 hours at that point. He said, we'll release you. When we release you, it goes on the computer. British Transport Police get a hold of it. If they get to your house before it and find everything we've left behind, you're in trouble. I got back. My mum had already bagged everything up. I was told to leave with the stuff and not come back, mate. She wasn't like aiding and abetting and like everything's fine. And 2 of my friends didn't. And the long and short of it is they went to prison and I didn't. So I'm very lucky because no way in a million years I was surviving 18 months in jail at 18.
So your life would be very different.
100%. Yeah, terrifyingly so.
Yeah.
So
and did that have a big impact on you?
Massive. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, this one this is from a legal. So what happens is you get assigned a social worker, and they start and look for things to use your creativity, if you like. So I realised that actually there was people out there who were prepared to pay me, and all I ever wanted to do was do the thing that I loved. I started to realise that there was money to be made out of it, and I could carry on doing what I wanted, but without the risk. I screwed up my A-levels, mainly because I was going through the court system at the time, and not really conducive to study. I had flown through my GCSEs, found it really easy. So therefore thought A-levels would be as well. I was predicted 2 A's and a B. I got a D and 2 E's. So my London School of Economics was kind of out. Yeah. Apparently.
Familiar story. I read Down the same route, yeah.
So I suddenly had to try and find something through clearing, and I ended up with Bradford and Ilkley Community College to do a business studies degree, which was attached to Bradford University, but definitely wasn't Bradford University. And when I was down there, I started to look for work just to kind of help fund my time. And this was something that came up through a community project that I'd been attached to in Newcastle. So Crossley Wood was a play area. And there was a block of flats, and they were just trying to make it nicer, I guess. Yeah. 3 people were arrested on the day the 2 days I did it. There was 3 people raided, like 3 flats raided, and people like pulled out. And it was that sort of area, you know. So I had all sorts of characters coming over talking to us, but I loved doing that. It was great. And I ended up going from that to doing live graffiti at raves.
Right.
So that became a thing. I got attached to a couple of touring bands around West Yorkshire, and I would do live performances, like sort of graffiti on stage while they were playing. Right. So it did actually turn into something positive in terms of being able to make some money. And I stopped instantly, and there was no question of me ever going back to doing it again. Yeah. Illegally. Yeah. It was very much the judicial system very much worked for me. I was absolutely myself, for want of a better word. It was quite scary. But yeah, it did affected my A-levels, and therefore my onward study for sure. Not in a good way.
But you kind of, in some ways, you've achieved your dream of combining your creative stuff and your love of music, presumably. Yeah. And actually not exactly making a living out of it, but at least it was a legitimate way to spend your time. Wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I had, when I left sort of college, I got 2-2, and scraped that together at the end. I started promoting club nights myself when I was down there, and all-nighters. I worked with a group called Activate, who had booked me originally to do graffiti, and I ended up helping them with their all-nighters a little bit, and I put coaches on from the northeast to travel down, and but I had my first big learning down there, a really big one about getting it wrong, right. Where I'd worked with these guys, and everything just seemed to go well. Everything they put on sold out. There were always amazing parties. There never seemed to be any real challenges. It was just the right time, right place. Yeah. Probably it wasn't through any great brilliance. Yeah. Maybe I'm not being fair on the people that founded Activate. They were pretty amazing. But I assumed that I was part of that brilliance, and it turns out I don't think I was. And if me and a friend who were at Leeds Uni decided to put one on in the music rooms where the Back to Basics and Up Your Ronson used to be. Up Your Ronson was Friday, Basics was Saturday. They were like massive early 90s club night. We took the Thursday and started something called Wag Your Tail, which was meant to be a student kind of focused rave night, really, and house night, whatever. Anyway, the first date, I never checked the dates, didn't do any real sort of due diligence or whatever you might call it. And I remember standing on the door. I'd paid for the DJ, who was Al Mackenzie, who at the time was part of Dareem's, who was quite famous, who cost a lot of money. Hadn't paid the security, which was a problem later. And the idea was I would make enough money on the door to clear the security and take some home. And I remember standing on the door looking up the street thinking there's nobody coming, and I didn't understand why. We got 70 people in, which nowhere near break even. So my break even point was way too high for a first event. Yeah. And I hadn't checked the diary, and it was Leeds University exams. And even students aren't like that stupid to go out and get wasted until 3 o'clock in the morning. So it was never going to work. Yeah. I got really cocky, and I paid the price because I was suddenly in debt to some people that you didn't want to be in debt to. Right. Security firms aren't usually backwards and coming forward. No, when they want the money, they get paid. Yeah. So we, after really quite successfully making enough money throughout my university time to never need to go to my parents and ask for any, I suddenly had to go and say, I need some money and I need it quickly. Yeah. And it's not for books and food, which was really frustrating. But it was a hell of a lesson in not getting cocky. Yeah. And
is that because they'd made it look easy, so you just assumed
maybe
I can do that?
Yeah. And I think until you start failing, like success comes from failure. Yeah. I'm not sure we celebrate failure enough in this country. I genuinely don't. I've often wondered, I listen to a lot of American podcasts and things, and a lot of these guys have failed many, many times.
Yeah.
I listened to one the other day about a guy who was storing energy using compressed air underground.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
He pitched 200 times before, it might have even been 300, an insane number of times before anybody backed it.
Yeah.
Now, how many people really, and he remortgaged his house, and, and that level of belief that you're right and everybody else is wrong, and that level of failure, I don't know how many
it's
people
almost a
drive
badge of honor, isn't it? Like in the States, I think, is you haven't really made it until you've failed half a dozen times, because you'll have learned half a dozen really good lessons from those failures.
And are you pushing it hard enough if you're not failing?
Yeah.
Is it just all just a bit comfortable?
Yeah.
And that's fine if that's what you want.
Yeah.
But I think that failure, genuinely, that one taught me as much as anything, really. So I left there and went to, I needed a job. I needed to find a job, and
a proper job.
A proper job, with my tutu. And I went for loads of jobs, didn't get them. And the one I really wanted was actually working for Reebok as just sales rep, like going around the shops with the new product. I used to say it was working for Adidas, but it wasn't. It was definitely Reebok. And I didn't get that, and I was devastated. The one I'd gone for as a backup was working for a company that were like meat traders.
Not quite as cool as it really.
Not very cool at all. Not what you say to girls in the pub, for example, if they ask what you do.
Sell mints.
Yeah. And they were actually, as it happens, it was a really good foundation in trading, in that they bought in 20, 30, even 100 ton of product. They would buy it forward. So, when they buy, like, say, 20 ton of strip line intended for sirloin steaks in catering butchers in the UK, and they buy it from Argentina 6 months in advance before it's hit the water, and then try and predict the price going forward, because of mega low margins. We were working like 2.5% net margin. So you need to get the currency right. It was actually a little bit more sophisticated, and we rarely saw the product. It was very much paper trading, really, or trading a commodity that you never interacted with. But it sounded shit, unfortunately. But I learned how to trade. I learned how to create markets to some degree. How to, if we had too much of something, how to ring all your customers and try and create demand. And it was short, I'd say low margin, high volume sales. So it wasn't particularly sophisticated, but it wasn't easy. It was a hard environment. And my boss was horrendous, a real bully. And I'm not worried about him suing me. I couldn't stand the man, and he ended up firing me rather unceremoniously. And we had to take him to court. To be honest, I never got to court, but we had to go and get a legal letter to say I'd been unfairly dismissed, which I won, obviously. He chucked a phone at me. I was on a phone call with a customer, and it was a disagreement, but it was the one that would have been easily sorted. My best customer. And he threw his phone at me, and I just started screaming. He was always screaming, shouting at everybody in the office, just a really angry guy. It's a shame. He had a nice side to him where he was a brilliant trader, but it was a really awful environment to work in. And actually, I got fired, got another job very quickly, got a little bit of money out of the compensate, the payoff. It worked out really well. But at the time I had a daughter, I was like 9 months old, and we had no money. Interest rates really high. The mortgage was like probably 60% of my salary. In a little flat that we had, and it was terrifying. Just suddenly not having a wage. Yeah. But fortunately, that again was a good learning, even though it was a very dark time. I learned how not to treat your staff, for sure. Yeah. Total demotivator as well. I was never motivated by the shouting. I just want to hide from it, and get out the way. So that was a good lesson. I learned about having big guns. If you go to war, go in with the biggest guns, because I called on my mom and to help me, and she took me down to Ward Hadaway, and we got a partner to write the letter, and he tore the letter from the other side to pieces. He just, I remember he sat with a red pen going, "You can't say that. That's not even law," and I got to write my own my own references and stuff. It's the guy had to sign. It was brilliant. So yeah, if you're going to go to war, go make sure you take the biggest guns that are available, and you've got a better chance of winning. Probably regardless of which side you're on, the right or wrong. But I was on the right side. So yeah, it was a good lesson, and I got a job in working for a little IBM business partner pretty much straight after. So that was my kind of route into technology and computing.
Right.
And that was where I learned about complex sales. It was like the lead time would be 6 months. You weren't ringing up trying to do a deal. You were trying to build a relationship over a 6 month period. Yeah. And so long lead time, high margin, just a totally different environment, highly complex, sophisticated product.
And is that what appealed to you about that? Because you've kind of gone from being, involved in raves and graffiti and stuff like that to something very complex and high tech, and it's but obviously something appealed.
Loved the technology. Yeah, and I remember when the internet was kind of a new thing in the mid 90s when I was working for the meat company. 95, I think I started. I had a website built for them. I'd love to know if the URL's still out there. Meat Web. That's probably worth a fortune, isn't it? Meat Web. I was involved in that. I used to help look after the server in the office, and I just liked fiddling with the tech. Yeah. Probably partly get away with my boss, but so it was a natural. It felt like a good progression, and I could see how much money they were making. I met a guy who worked for Microsoft. He was selling Microsoft products, and he had like a lush car, and I just thought that's what I want. Yeah. Nice suits, and I just thought he looked like he was doing really well. So that was what I fancied getting into that world. Right. Then I enjoyed it. I loved it. I did IBM sales school, which is amazing sales training. You go and have a week-long camp, and it's quite intense, but it certainly was the best sales training on the planet at the time. It was amazing, and I learned about relationship building. I think the real understanding that, even though I'd been doing it for the previous few years anyway, but that real understanding that if you're going to sell something to somebody, they really have to trust you. You have to have a rapport. People do business with people, don't they? Not with it's the product isn't irrelevant. It's really important.
It's almost secondary though, isn't it?
But it is to the relationship. You have to get that relationship, right? And those days were phenomenal grounding in that. I had the guy I worked for, I went from the worst boss in the world, a guy who was fantastic, Ed. What's his second name now? Ed. Remember, he was into scooters, I was into scooters, so he had a Lambretta, which was brilliant. So we used to, if we'd hit our, if we were on target and everything was going well, we'd go and mess about on the scooters for a bit, which was just unheard of at the time. Where I'd come from an environment where if I was a minute late back from my lunch, I was screamed at, to my boss looking outside, "Oh, it's sunny, come on, we've got to have a little ride." And it was just a totally different world. To go out with my boss and just have fun, rather than being constantly terrified as, what was I going to get shouted at. So yeah, I loved that job. Amco Computers, it wasn't far from here actually. It was in Fawcett Street, I think, in Sunderland. Not far from where we're doing this. And small company, and they sold kind of ERP, sort of relatively low end, but ERP systems to smallish businesses. Really good grounding, enjoyed it, liked the people. They trusted me, gave me some freedom, and I flourished in that environment. It was really, really good. From there, I went to a bigger IBM business partner. I went to the biggest. So at the time, if you wanted to buy any IBM kit, you went through the business partner network. And I remember starting the new one, it was called Triangle Computers at the time. I think we worked on about 18% margin on machines that were like £500,000 up. So I worked on something called AS400s, which were kind of mainframey. They weren't mainframes, but it was like ultra stable, ultra secure. Never, they were like 99.999% uptime kind of thing. Yeah. So they were used in environments, just in time production environments.
Pretty much industry standard, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Where you couldn't afford to have downtime. If you've got a production line running, you have to stop the entire line because your system goes down. That's just not an option. So it was, these 0.9 of it was all about how many nines you had after the 99. So I really enjoyed that. I was a bit of an evangelist. Became very much, I believed, drank the Kool-Aid, as the Americans would say. I really enjoyed it. Went to work for the biggest AS400 business partner, who were over in Warrington, Triangle. I was working from home predominantly. I used to have to go over there like once a fortnight maybe, and spend a lot of time out on client site, like I say, building these relationships. Very target driven, so you were given fairly aggressive targets. But yeah, I absolutely loved that world, and that really was the making then of me as an entrepreneur, where I really started to learn my craft, where I've began to feel that I was confident enough where I could potentially do something myself.
Was that a conscious thing? I'm going to do these corporate jobs to learn lots of skills and then branch out on my own.
Yes and no. I always wanted to do my own thing. I was acutely aware I wasn't ready after I needed to. So I had my daughter very young, my 20, early, she's 27 now, I was 25. Me and her mum had been together from when we were very young. We were kids really. And then we had a daughter, and she's amazing. She's doing a PhD now. I have no idea where she got that brain from. It ain't from me. So it wasn't easy for her probably growing up. Me and her mum split up when she was about 2. So I had responsibility from quite a young age. A lot of my friends were off travelling and stuff after university, or even without going to university, and generally having fun, whereas I absolutely had to make money from that point on, and I've never been able to stop until the day I sold the company, really. So that was always there, and whilst I was trying to make money on the side, I wasn't ready to go and be 100% kind of on my own. I needed a paycheck. I needed that, and I was aware I needed that. But as I was working at Triangle, I was making more money at that point. I was able to use a bit of that money to buy a flat, which I did up and was going to sell or let out in Jesmond. And I was making decent. I made a lot of money one quarter. So like I said before, it was very bonus driven, very target driven. And I absolutely smashed my target one quarter, like blew it out the water. And I knew I was going to, but because I'd focused so hard on that, I had nothing lined up for the next quarter at all. And I remember going to the sales. We went to like a quarterly conference with all the other business partners, and they were like, "Hey, well done, Julian." I got all the accolades, and then somebody came over and went, "What you got lined up for this quarter?" Then I was like, "Oh, I've got a clue." And he went, "You do know they'll double your target, don't you?" And I was like, "No, surely not." And he went, and sure enough, my target went through the roof, and I just had nothing. So I thought, well, I might as well go now when I'm on good terms and I've got a bit of money in the bank. So I said to my boss, "I'm done. I'm gonna have some time off." I actually went back to university and did a master's, which I did with my own money, which makes you very studious rather than an undergrad when I didn't care.
Nice. When it's somebody else's money.
All of a sudden I'd written the check out for it, so I was the one sitting when people were coming in late. I was going to like lock the door. I was that mature student that everyone probably hated. But yeah, I went and did a master's. Really enjoyed that. Filled in some blanks, if you like. Maybe gave myself a little bit more confidence that I could run a business. Unfortunately, around that time, so I bought this flat, an upstairs flat that I was doing up. I was about to start doing up, and I had a scooter crash, and I hit a car head on my Lambretta, and ended up in hospital for months. I was in a wheelchair for I don't know how long, 6 to 8 months maybe. Still walking with a walking stick a couple of years later. So the recovery was horrendous. Very, very lucky to be alive, I'm honest. I landed in a hedge, so had the combined speed being a mile an hour either way, I would have died almost certainly. Impact, you ride bikes. Death from motorbikes crashes often comes from the impact of the landing. So you break everything down there when you hit the car, and it's when you land that your head gets banged around, all your internal organs get smashed about, and I had a lovely soft landing, so lucky. Didn't feel like it at the time, but really was quite lucky. And since 2 years after that crash, I lost one of my best friends to an almost identical crash. So, acutely aware of how wrong that could have gone. But the double-edged, there was 3 things Obviously really bad being in a crash and therefore being in hospital and not being able to walk. I just bought an upstairs flat, which I no longer could get into because I couldn't get up the stairs. So that was just sat there hemorrhaging cash. So instead of being like, this will make me some money, it was costing me money. And then the third thing was I just left my job. So instead of being on the sick, getting some sick pay, which I would have been brilliantly covered working in that corporate environment, I had to fund it myself. Yeah. So everything I'd saved suddenly was kind of disappeared, really. I'd just done my master's, so all of the savings I'd had were largely disappeared anyway.
I mean, use it for anything.
It's the timing was spectacularly bad, really. Never going to be great timing to have an accident like that, but I couldn't really have gotten much worse. So yeah, again, you talk about life-changing events. I mean, seeing my family, my wife, the really difficult bit about that, the life-changing bit was actually seeing the reaction of my family.
Yeah.
I crashed near Ripon. I went to Harrogate. I was at the Harrogate to Ripon road, so I was staying at Harrogate Hospital, which is an hour and a bit from here. So my family had to do that journey while all the time I was there. I think I was there for about 6 weeks, and they transferred me up to Newcastle General.
Right.
But for that 6 weeks, my wife came down every day. My mum and my dad and my sister were coming to visit me all the time. My daughter, who was just a kid, she was maybe, how old Jamie was, 20. So she was just 7 or 8 maybe. She always struggled with the timelines, but I remember her looking at me, not really understanding why I was in hospital or not being able to. I certainly didn't feel that she understood what I was going through, and therefore I was finding it hard to explain to her that I was okay. I think it was quite difficult for her, but really difficult for your family. So whatever you're going through in something like that, your family are going through.
They go through it as well.
Absolutely horrendous. Because the greatest one in the world, I'm lying there full of morphine most of the time, being looked after. They're the ones that are worrying and speaking to the surgeons and the doctors and find out whether or not I want to be able to walk again and what the long-term impact is and having all that worry. I genuinely didn't have any of that worry for weeks because I was wasted. So yeah, really difficult. And that definitely shapes you in terms of making sure that you don't waste time and you go after things that you want to do with your life. It's, life is short. And when you have an incident like that where you genuinely could have lost your life, and then even 2 years later, a few years later, it was compounded when my good friend Nick died in an almost identical crash. It again hit home, and I still have like one of Nick's caps in a room at home, and I'll have a little chat with him every now and again. And it still hits hard now that he isn't here and I am.
Yeah.
And why did I get away with that and he didn't? It just seems insane, and that's the way it is. There's no rhyme or reason to it. So yeah, very fortunate, and unfortunate at the same time, I guess. But that was really, I kind of had to start and make some money very, very quickly after I got better, I suppose. Didn't really want to go and get another job. I felt I'd left that world. So I started to look to do my own thing, and I was back to selling my own time for money again, probably. And I just did bits of consultancy, ARP consultancy, or anything to do with technology. I felt I could advise businesses on. I was all right. That was when I bought my orange bus,
which we shall see here.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I didn't have a company car anymore, obviously. So I remember after the scooter crash, my wife saying, "No more scooters."
Yeah, get 4 wheels.
Yeah, get 4. So I actually bought a common gear first. I was sat in my wheelchair looking at eBay. There was a common gear up for sale. Then my wife said, "That looks like a shit box." And that looks fine. Anyway, I said, "I won't spend more than $2,000 on it." $4,000 later, it was mine. It got delivered. It was rotten. I mean, you couldn't even, now you would fix it. It would be worth doing. But then it was, so that ended up, I sold it for like £500. That was a mistake. Not one I've learned from. I've done it again since then. And then I bought that. And what I used to do is I would go, if I had a client to see, I would go and see them. And then if I had somebody else to see, I would just go and park up somewhere and sit in the back, put the kettle on, sit with my laptop, do a little bit of work.
Office.
Yeah, and I just became known as Julian with the orange bus. And that therefore is where the business name came from for what originally was called Orange Bus IT.
Right.
And then I changed it we dropped the IT when it became more of a digital agency.
Right.
and that became a brand in
Right.
itself.
Right.
And actually, I learned a lot about how you differentiate yourself in a crowded market. That differentiated me. People knew who I was because I turned up in something different.
Because again, I guess IT consultancy isn't the most, in some respects, glamorous or eye-catching
No,
thing to be in, is it?
At the time, it was very much, predominantly blokes in suits with laptops.
Yeah.
And
one is much the same as another.
Yeah, 100%. And you win work based on your credentials as opposed to anything brand related. And most people's companies were their name or something really dull.
Yeah.
And so to have something very different like this, and I was very much trying to do what I saw in the US, where instead of still wearing a suit every day, which was very IBM, very quickly moved from that to hoodies and trying to be a little bit branded. Everything was branded. I was obsessed with branding really, really early on. Yeah. But that became, so my sister was working in PR, and she said, look, when we're trying to get photos into magazines and newspapers and things, the photos of IT people are always really, really dull. So we had something different. Yeah. And that got us loads of PR coverage, the Orange Bus. Stuff that it just didn't justify the size of the company. The company itself didn't justify the coverage, but because the photo editor had a decent picture, he would say that's going to brighten up the pages a bit. So sometimes the copy would be really, really small, but I got the picture because it brightened up the magazine or the photo, the newspaper. And I think you've got the next photo is the magazine.
So we've got
so Enterprise Northeast. So it was just a perfect example of he'd never, he was able.
Was their cover always orange? Or
No, it wasn't.
In honour of
because of the Orange Bus. So it just that was just me. I still had my IBM laptop, so I hadn't been going very long. And my sister said, the contrast of the suit and the van is a really good one. And we did it a few times. Once I met my co-founder, Mike. So I did that for a while. And then I met Mike at an event, like networking event. And he was talking about leaving his job. He was working in AI and robotics at the time, which this is like 18 years ago, 17, 18 years ago. So really early in AI. And he was on about leaving his job, and we got on well, and he said, look, why don't we join forces? I had a piece of work somebody had asked me to do that I didn't have a contractor for. At the time I was doing, handing out little bits of work to contractors rather than just selling my own time to web work and anything that involved coding. That I wasn't a developer by any stretch. And so Mike did that bit of work. We got on well, and decided that he joined Orange Bus as a co-founder and dropped the IT, and we became, Orange Bus isn't the idea of being a digital agency rather than an IT company. Right. But we used the bus, and that one I sold, bought a red one, meant to paint it, never did. But we used the bus relentlessly in PR shots for years. It was very much part of the brand, right up until the end. I mean, like, without going too far ahead, but we ended up, we had a big event in Covent Garden, and there was pictures of the bus everywhere in Covent Garden. we used it relentlessly because it was part of our brand.
So it was worth its weight in gold, that little bus, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, I remember speaking to a guy who had a wheelie bin company, and he actually came up to me and said, you should use that as much as you can because it's a total differentiator. He was really eccentric, he had a big handlebar tash, and that was like his differentiator. Right. He's like, wheelie bins aren't cool, but I am eccentric, so people let me in the room.
And it almost doesn't matter what that differentiation is, as long as you're good at what you do. If you want to stand out, it doesn't really matter, does it?
No. And you have to find something. Yeah. And at the time, there were loads of little digital agencies. Yeah. So this was around, there was tons of money in the region with One Northeast. They were funding something called Project Northeast, I think, PNE, which was on Pink Lane. Mm-hmm. And it was, you could start a business and go and get a couple of grand grant from PNE to get a website done and some stationery or something. And I was doing loads of those little jobs. And there was quite a lot of public money around at the time. It was a great ecosystem. But there was loads of people doing it, 2-3 man businesses with one creative, one techie, one, whatever. So you had to do something to stand out for sure. Yeah. And that was our thing for sure. And we carried on doing it. I mean, it became a big part of the story. The first big piece of work we won was with O'Neill, the surf brand. They were ubiquitous at the time on the UK High Street. O'Neill hired my van, not that one, the red one, which was a split screen van, so nothing earlier, with the pop-up windows at the front. So pretty iconic. One of the marketing people saw it on the beach when I was surfing, asked if they could use it for a photo shoot. And I said, yes. I gave them a price. They agreed it. And then I said, but I come with the van and I have to move it around. That's part of the gig.
Right.
And I didn't need to, but I did it because I wanted to get close to them.
Yeah.
And it turned out they had issues with email marketing at the time.
Right.
So we offered to solve them, basically. I mean, I had a solution for them on the day. Before the shoot, we'd had a look at everything they were doing and realised that these emails were horrendous.
Yeah.
Big, sort of single image files. And so we had a solution, brought it up in conversation, and we can do that for you. Well, what would that cost? Told them it was pretty cheap at the time. Yeah. But all of a sudden we had a corporate client. We had a household name and it was regular money.
Which came from the fact that they liked your bus because they were a cool company themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it fitted their brand.
Yeah.
We co-sponsored the British Surf Championships with them. So, and all that meant is we built everything for nothing. So we did the website for nothing. We did the posters for nothing. They pushed my van into Eldon Square, and it was in Eldon Square for a week, like on display, the bit out like where they do all the pop-up stands outside Boots and Phoenix and whatever. So, which again, that had Orange Bus, the web address of Orange Bus on the windows. So it was a great co-promotion thing for us. We were just able to utilize that for exposure at all times. It was brilliant, really, really good, and became part of the success of the company. Would we have been as successful without it? Who knows? Probably. We would have found something.
Yeah, but it sounds like it opened a lot of doors.
Loads.
It caught a lot of imaginations amongst people. Yeah.
So the best story about the bus is how we got into Formula One. So I mean, God, when I did this presentation a while ago and I put a picture up of it, it was broken down. My kind of head's in the back of it, and the quote is my wife saying it's broken again, isn't it? And we broke down like on every motorway in the country at some point. It was constantly breaking down. And I broke down on the coast road, which, for people who live around here, busy. It was rush hour, middle lane, cars beeping at me because obviously I'd done it on purpose. Which I remember thinking, this is odd. I haven't stopped here like for a cup of tea. I was shit out. And a lad stopped behind me in a really nice car. It was his dad's car. Put his hazards on and ran at the front and said, do you want me to help? And I was like, that'd be amazing. Yeah. Pushed it to the side. He came and parked up next to me. He was sat in his car and introduced himself, and his name was Harry Volgard. And Harry's dad, Nigel Volgard, owned what is now the Volgard Group. Lots of pubs and buildings in Newcastle, in Morpeth. And Harry was a racing driver at the time. So I just got chatting to him and I said, look, I really appreciate you helping me while we're waiting for the RAC. What do you do? And he told me, and I said, have you got a website? And he said, no. I said, well, why don't we build you one? Will you put a sticker on of our logo if we build you a website as a thank you? And he went, that'd be great. Because at any level of motor racing, they don't like spending money on anything that isn't making the car go faster. So he didn't have a website. So we built him one for nothing effectively, and we got some exposure. Right. That was the Sea Cooper Art Championship, which followed the British touring cars around. And it turned out Harry was quite good, and he won the championship that year or the year after. Excuse me. So after he won, he got a drive in the British touring cars, which still is on ITV. Has a massive audience, lots of fans, travels the country. Because we'd been with him from the start, they took us into the British touring cars. We got a bigger logo on his car. We started to do a little bit more for him. Then there was 2 cars in each team. The other driver in the team said, can I have a website as well? And can you do some work for me? I'll do the same deal. So we did the same deal, and we ended up then doing it for the team. So we then got in, we'd gone from, an individual driver on a fairly low exposure championship to 2 cars and a team in the British touring cars. And then Harry did quite well in that and got into the European Touring Car Championship and then the World Touring Car one. We just followed him all the way up. So we went to Portimao in Portugal as guests of the team, and it was an amazing time. And our logo at the time was there, and it was right across the bumper, the front bumpers of the car. I mean, we were prime sponsor. It was amazing. Never had to spend a penny in cash, but obviously time.
Yeah,
there is a time for money exchange.
Yeah.
They then went into into endurance car racing, where ultimately that leads you to Le Mans. Then we ended up having an Aston Martin. They were racing Aston Martins. We had 2 Aston Martins with the orange bus logo on down the side and on the bonnet at Le Mans. I mean, just mind-blowing. What that actually genuinely did for us is it allowed us to, we created an Apple Watch app for the Aston Martin racing team for Le Mans. So it allowed us to say we were working for Aston Martin, which we were. So what a brand that is to put, and that actually we got other clients because of that.
Right.
Even though Aston Martin actually was don't know if it still is, was quite a small business in terms of turnover. Yeah. It was nowhere near one of the bigger companies we worked for, but in terms of, I think it's still one of the most prestigious parts in the world.
Is, yeah.
We were at Le Mans 24 hours of Le Mans, which is obviously the pinnacle of endurance racing. Yeah. So we did that, and then that team ended up, the guy who was the team principal ended up going to work in Formula One, and he got a sponsorship deal with Force India. So we became Force India F1's digital partner. And now that stretches over, I don't know, like 14 years or something. But you can trace that Formula One deal right back to breaking down on the coast road and taking advantage of a situation that looked pretty shit at the time. Yeah. But actually turning that into, can there some good come out of this? Now, there's probably 100 of those things that didn't turn out with us working in Formula One and sitting in the paddock club in Milan with guests. I mean, but the point is that 1 in 100 can, and you have to take those opportunities. Yeah. And I believe that one of our biggest successes has been spotting an opportunity and maximizing the outcome. Yeah. And I think anybody who wants to take anything away from anything I ever say, that's the most important thing. A lot of people aren't great at that, if I'm honest. You get stuck in the weeds, you get stuck in the day-to-day, the challenges that you've got, the problems you've got. And the reality is there are opportunities around you all the time.
Even when you've broken down on the course.
Yeah, 100%. And it's about your outlook. Yeah. So there's quite a famous study, and I can't remember the guy's name, so I apologize in advance, but it was quite a famous study done by a researcher into the concept of luck. And it is the hypothesis was luck is a construct that was invented by the kind of hierarchies to keep the peasants down in the past. So it was superstition. It was argue religion, keep the proletariat in the place, sort of thing. Yeah. And he said there's no such thing as luck; it's a state of mind. And he ran this test, and he recruited, I think, 50 people who considered themselves lucky, 50 people who described themselves as unlucky. Yeah. And then he gave them all a copy of the New York Times and said, count the adverts in the New York Times. If you get it right, you get $100 or something. The people who considered themselves lucky overwhelmingly spotted an advert on the 4th page that said there are 397 adverts in this newspaper. Right. Overwhelmingly, they spotted it. Yeah. The people who considered themselves unlucky didn't. Yeah. And that was genuinely a study that you can go and look up. It happened. And that blew my mind when I read that, but I just thought it makes sense. Yeah. Keep your eyes open, be aware of that there might be a shortcut, there might be an opportunity somewhere, there might be something that comes to you that makes life easier or gives you an opportunity to do something better. Don't just get your head down and kind of plow on with whatever the graft is, because you're likely to miss things. Yeah. And I love that concept.
It's interesting because one of our former guests was Paul Callahan from the Leighton Group. No relation.
It's not. No, I know Paul well. I like Paul's great.
And a lot of what came out of what he was talking about was very similar things. Yeah. He's done some amazing things, but a lot of them came from just spotting an opportunity that someone else might have missed or not seen for what it was or not jumped on it. And I think it's a really good lesson there, isn't it? To just always be always be looking for something
Yeah.
because you just never know.
Yeah, for sure. And the opportunities are there. I fully believe that.
Yeah.
So yes, so that was the van and Orange Bus. I mean, over that time, Orange Bus went from 2 people, Mike and I, sitting in a cupboard really in Jesmond, a tiny little office. We went from there to the Windmill on Claremont Road. Again, all about how things looked as opposed to how practical they were. It was the worst building you could ever have as an office. It was freezing cold for 5 months of the year and too hot for 5 months. So we had like a 2-month window where the weather was acceptable either side of summer. But it looked amazing. We'd park the van outside it, take photos. Just again became part of the brand.
Yeah.
We grew kind of haphazardly at first, trying to find our niche and what we were good at for the first few years. And then really hit upon a moment of a tipping point, you would probably call it, Vans and Malcolm Gladwell. We were kind of hand to mouth. You find yourself in a service business when you're selling time for money, other people's, it doesn't matter, or your own. You get to a point where you're just kind of turning the wheel. And we were making money. We got up to about 20 staff, but we were just kind of paying, everybody's mortgage was getting paid, everyone was getting a wage, but there was no money left at the end of the month. So it was always quite precarious. We could always run out of money. And we were taking work on for cash flow reasons rather than because it was the right work to take on. And that kind of came to a head we had one client that was a nightmare and we didn't want the job, but we took it because we needed it. He rang me on Christmas Eve and I was just about to watch a film with my toddler son at the time. And he went, have you got a minute? And I said, I'm just about to watch this film. It's Christmas Eve. It was a Thursday, but still, it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Christmas Eve. And then he was on the phone for like an hour and a half and I was thinking, this is a nightmare. We just don't need to be beholden to people like this. So we went and raised some money. We borrowed £150,000 from North Star. They were the only people, Alistair Gregg was the only person who believed in us and would back us. And we'll always be thankful to him for that. He knows that. The banks weren't interested. Banks are very low risk lenders, so they already had the house. My house and Mike's house, and we had the overdraft was as big as we could get, so they were done. Nobody really invests in service businesses. They're quite hard to raise investment until they get quite big. So North Star, for whatever reason, backed us. They liked something they saw. We borrowed £150,000 off them, and we used that money to stop taking on crap work.
Right. Should we? That sounds like a good place
to
have a break.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, get a cup of tea.
We'll stop for a cup of tea, and then we'll come back and hear about what happened after that critical point.
Great.
So welcome back. We've got a nice cup of tea, and as always, Julian has chosen the biscuits, which in this case are dark chocolate covered ginger biscuits. We've had one already because I didn't really want to be doing this with a mouthful of biscuit. So is there a story, or do you just like them?
Just really like them. Yeah, I'm a big fan of them. So we used to work for Rington's. That is a story.
Right.
So we did Rington's first e-commerce website. So I'm very much into tea.
Right. This probably isn't the best cup of tea you've ever had, but
I didn't want to say anything. But there is a certain way to make tea,
and we didn't follow it.
We didn't follow it, but it's pretty good. It's okay.
So we were at this, or just about to approach this kind of tipping point, as you described it.
So we borrowed some money in order to get rid of the clients that we were working for, where it was just for cash flow. We took a little bit of time to review the kind of makeup of what was good, bad and indifferent about who we were working for. And it turned out kind of Pareto's law sort of 80-20 thing. It was actually 72% of our clients were either break even or loss making.
Right.
So that left 28% that were funding the business effectively.
Yeah.
And guess where you spend all your time? It's in the 72. It's not in the 28. So,
and it's crazy, but it's not uncommon, is
no,
it?
it's really common actually, especially with businesses where you're selling time for money, because you need to keep that cash coming in all the time. So we very much made a decision at that point to just go for it, and we just said we borrowed 150.
So how long had you been going at this point of the business?
Maybe 5-6 years.
Right.
So we were employee, I know this number because we employed a guy called Chris Kennedy, who was employee 17, and he came in to do project management for us, and he came in and really made that his. We were kind of learning on. One of the things that happens with owner founders of things is you just kind of learn how to do everything as you get to that point. Chris came in and went, well, I've done this before. This is how I run things. And we just went, brilliant, off you go. And he was instrumental in professionalising the way that we ran our project. We therefore had more information so we could track what was profitable, what wasn't. We could therefore make proper decisions on let's do more of this and let's do less of that. So Chris was key. At the same time as bringing Chris in, we borrowed this money, allowed us to do less of the things we'd identified that weren't profitable. We retired some clients, we got rid of some clients, and that they all said we were making a mistake. And I'm not aware of any of them having been a massive client to anybody ever since. So we clearly weren't, but it was hard because we did start losing money briefly. The positive bit is we went to our bigger clients, the 28%, and said to them, you know, we want to do more for you. Is there anything else we can be doing? And pretty much all of them just said, oh, we just thought you were too busy. So, which we were.
And you were, but with the
wrong thing. So we ended up getting more of the right work. And we then positioned ourselves as a business that was better suited to winning bigger jobs anyway, bigger clients. Because the reality is, it takes almost the same amount of time to win a piece of work for 100 grand as it does for 20. You know, to be honest, the small business with a smaller budget often is harder to sell to because they want more in return, and as they should. It's their money. If you go to a corporate who've got a budget of X million and you're spending a fraction of that on one project that they have to deal with, I'm not saying it's easier by any stretch. It's just a different process. And if you're going to put the time in, you might as well put it in at that time.
Because for them, it's not their only decision that month. It's part of a much bigger picture.
And there's more to go at afterwards. Whereas you get a lot of churn when you're going after the smaller ones. So that was a really big lesson. And what we realised is if we go for more of those sort of clients, actually we were capable of winning them. But it really was a decision where we just said, if this doesn't work, we'll pack in, do something else, because it was exhausting at that point. We're a really good team, but we were just tired of not having any money left at the end of the year and having all of the risk associated with that.
But does your approach have to be different though in winning, you know, a bigger piece of work from a corporate client? Do you have to present yourself differently, or is it pretty much?
Probably a little bit. Well, you have to be. So the thing that the corporate clients really look for that maybe the smaller ones don't is, are they going to be around in 5 years' time? They want long-term relationships.
Right.
So you have to present yourself in such a way that is a long-term partner, which is obviously what you want anyway. So yes, there is an element of making sure that you present yourself in a way that suits the client, for sure. But that was quite natural for us, to be honest, because when we started the agency, we always had the intention of selling it, right? So that was something that we wanted to do. We wanted to pay an exit at some point, a payday. So we'd always present ourselves as bigger than we were at all stages of the journey.
Because you had that end goal
always
in mind.
But we always structure ourselves to be a bigger business so that when we got bigger, it wasn't as hard to get there. So we tried to do everything in a way that a bigger company would do as early as we could, you know, long before we needed to a lot of the time. Right. So that probably helped that a little bit. Because once we went from there, we accelerated phenomenally quickly from there. So we went from like employee 17, Chris, up to 60 plus people in space of 2 years. It was taking us maybe 5 or 6 years to get to 17. You know, not making a profit to making a lot of money in that period of time as well. You know, kind of, we were throwing off hundreds of thousands, if not more, very, very quickly. I say very quickly, I mean like over the space of 2 years, because we once you hit a tipping point, again, another one, some sort of tipping point in that service world, you cover your costs. Your overheads, broadly speaking, stay the same. If you can do 80% of your time, you can spend 80% of your time making money, as opposed to 20% of your time making money,
you're going to make more money.
It's compounded, and all of a sudden we just found ourselves able to compete for bigger pieces of work, which meant that we could hire more staff, but broadly speaking, the fixed costs could stay the same way, stay at the same value. So the next big kind of change, if you like, the really big tipping point, and this, I spoke about this yesterday. I was at an event, the Scale Up Institute, which Sage hosted, and we were talking about levers that can allow people to scale faster. You know, what can government and what can policy and macro factors, what's there that can make a difference? And the reality is they can change the landscape so that businesses that are capable of scaling up are able to win work with the government. And that's the one lever they've got that's really easy to pull, that has a direct impact. And certainly for ourselves, and I know for Opencast, for example, who are now 500 strong, we both won work from government when the policy changed, so that there was a directive that said that they had to give a certain amount of work to SMEs, rather than giving it all to Accenture or EY or whoever. So there's a double benefit for the government for doing it. One is, I think they get a more creative team. So we were highly specialised, used to doing agency style work for very demanding customers, and suddenly we were able to apply all of that knowledge and that thought and experience onto government projects, rather than a bunch of people who've only ever worked on government projects, who are brilliant, by the way. But you're kind of on a single track a little bit.
You're not going to get anything new or innovative.
I think it's harder.
I
think it's harder. Now, I do think with the way that the GDS, I think it's called GDS, the way that the government have digitised everything, I do think it's been amazing, transformational for people, for the consumer, for us. And I do think there's a lot of innovation there. But I will always believe, in the same way that if a corporate uses an external agency rather than keeping everything in-house, you just get fresh ideas. It's inevitable. So they get that benefit. But you also get the benefit of allowing smaller businesses to scale up aggressively, which we did. And I know I'm not speaking for Opencast, but I know they did as well. They benefited the same. So Tom was there, the CEO of Opencast, and we both said the same. That is a lever that government can pull and should pull. And actually, they seem to have drifted away from that a little bit over the last, not this government per se, over the last couple of years, apparently. But we won a contract with HMRC that was utterly transformational for the business. So Mike and I were in Dublin at a large event called Web Summit, which is now in Lisbon in Portugal. And we were on our way to the afternoon sessions, and we got a phone call from our FD saying that something we'd pitched for looked like it was coming in quickly. And could we go and sit down somewhere and run through some numbers with them? So we did, and it was, I can't remember, maybe 17, 18 people needed now, really, really quickly, a couple of weeks or something. And we ran through the numbers and couldn't believe it, literally back of a beer mat with a biro. And it was checking them again, because it was literally transformational. Because you find yourself in a position where you can suddenly cover all your costs, and the government doesn't go bust. They tend to pay you on time. They tend to be long-term projects. You get on that roster, and it is transformational. Not just because we relied on that money, but because we were then able to use that to then expand everything else, do everything else. So, real game changer. That, and I feel quite passionate that is something that they should do more of, is to make it easy for smaller companies to challenge for those large pieces of work, because the benefits far outweigh any risk. The downside to it is the people making the decision, if they're not incentivized in the right way, will make the decision that protects them. It's just inevitable. So it's the old "nobody got fired for buying IBM" adage, Really, if you put out a multi-million pound contract to Accenture, the government have been doing that for years, so nobody's ever going to say, what did you do that for? So I feel quite passionate about that.
Did you find that your time working in that corporate world helped you when you were, because there's two things. You said your relationship building was a key skill, I guess, that you learned, but then also working in that corporate world, did those two things help you, do you think, when you were working with those sorts of clients,
maybe,
as opposed to someone who just done a degree and had started up a little agency?
Probably, Realistically, I'm not sure I've ever thought about it. It's a good question. Almost certainly. It helped us structure deals properly once they got to a certain size. So I was used to working on deals for IBM that were $500,000 to $1 million. It was normal. When we started Orange Bus, we were 2,000 to 10,000, then 10 to 20, 20 to 50. Then you get 50 to 100, and all of a sudden it's like, well, if we get this wrong, if you get a deal on 6 figures wrong, you can rapidly burn through all of your profit, really, really quickly. And one of the things that I learned very early on from Mike was, you ask a developer how long something's going to take, and they say 10 hours. You go, okay, well, what's the likelihood of it taking longer than that? Well, if things go wrong, 12 hours, 16 hours, 18 hours, 20, 30 is possible. 40 is possible. The upside is really limited. You're not going to go from 10 to 0. So you've really got to get stuff right. And you have to be able to structure contracts in a way that allows for that exploration as to what the end piece of work looks like. That has to be done as a partnership, as opposed to the client kind of beating the supplier over the head with a stick. And I found that those contracts were harder to negotiate in the first place, but much easier to execute.
Right.
And maybe.
So it's worth putting the effort in at that stage.
Yeah, because it's you're really keen to win a deal.
Yeah. And
you you should be negotiating as hard as you can at that point to make sure you don't accept things that are likely to cost you a lot of money further down the line. One of the biggest ones we ever won was with Pearson Education, and it was an agile project. So the idea was that some of the outcomes weren't fixed, or some of the factors weren't fixed. So you've got time, money, and features, I suppose. Then you have to have some flexibility there. You've either got to have more money, more time, less features, whatever it is, in order to hit some sort of target. And that was really difficult because it was the first one we'd ever done at that scale, but it was the first one they'd ever done as well. Right. Rather than going, this is exactly what we want, how much is it, right? You now have to do that on a fixed cost basis, which if you're doing anything complex with software is almost impossible. You can't, if you're building something for the first time, you can't possibly know how long that's going to take up front. So if you're held to a contract like that, then you have to just fill it full of loads of spare money in case it goes wrong. And obviously, you're not going to win the deal if you do that. So negotiating and being a partner again and understanding how to build those relationships so there was trust there, it probably helped, for sure. But they were really important lessons. If you grow too fast and you get those things wrong, you could be in just as much trouble. But they were great days. They were probably the best days in terms of how exciting it was when you're growing that quickly. Not without its challenges, but very exciting. We became a bit of a name in the industry. We were well known. We were sponsoring events. We had a good reputation. Hiring was relatively easy because we had a good reputation for looking after our staff. We had a great brand. It was really good. It was so bizarrely we decided to sell a company. Well, that's what you do, right? So, but like I said, we always wanted to, and we always wanted to sell on the way up rather than wait for it to hit the top and come down. So, we started to think about it earlier. Then, we knew it would take time. We wanted to find the right buyer. That's really work out, but it's quite an arduous process. It's quite a stressful thing to go through, and probably worth discussing, really, because a lot of people who haven't been on that journey yet, it's often quite hard. So you see the upside. The upside is you get a big check. Yeah. And let's be honest, that's why most people do it. So we had enough probably of the risk. Right. Because you're only ever a couple of big decisions going against you when you run a service company, being in trouble. If you've got, I always remember a story a friend of mine told, and I won't mention who it was, but he ran an agency in London. They had £1 million in the, I remember him saying, I've got £1 million in the bank in their business, and we've just lost our biggest client. And I remember thinking, oh, well, poor you, £1 million. And he said, I've got 3 options. One is we reduce the team size by half, and we burn through the money that we've got in a slower rate, but we can't do all the work that we've become famous for. Right. The other one is we keep the team size the same. We burn through the money in 6 months, and if we don't replace our client, we shut the doors, we lose everything. And the third one is, there's 3 founders, we split the money 3 ways, we shut the doors, and we get a couple $100,000 each for the last 10 years worth of effort. And I remember thinking, well, none of those are very good.
They're not very attractive choices, are they?
Awful, really.
Yeah.
So that was always at the back of my mind. I was always concerned that, especially working in government, if you get a macroeconomic change or political change, something changes at policy level
that you've got no control over.
Doesn't matter how good you are.
Yeah.
The government could just suddenly come out and say, we've decided we don't like SMEs anymore. We want to give it all to Accenture.
Yeah.
And you're out the door. And suddenly you've got half of your workforce benched, or it was 40% of ours probably. And that would have been, we were always just conscious that risk was there. And it is a grind. It is hard work. It's relentless trying to keep a business of that size. Mm-hmm. You get up to 10 million turnover and 100 staff. It's hard keeping that going. Yeah. No matter how good your contracts are, how good your reputation is, it's hard to throw off enough money that doesn't become stressful. Mm-hmm. And we just thought tax rules were different then as well, mind, and that was a big motivator. They have changed that. So we benefited from Entrepreneur's relief was 10% then on up to 10 million, I think. Now it's 1 million and it's going to 14% and then 18%. And I have to say, it's so hypocritical. I absolutely fully support them changing those rules because I'm not sure we would have sold the company. We would have probably carried on trying to scale it. Right. Had it not been so tax advantage, such a tax advantage to sell rather than trying to keep it. When we ran the numbers, we were going to have to work and continue to grow at the same rate for about 7 years as we were due to sell it. Yeah. And all that risk for 7 years. And now, yes, we would have still owned the thing at the end of it, but it just looked like was that the right thing to do? And we both had young families and everything that comes with it. So that was why we made the decision to go to the market, and we put the company up for sale, which is really hard because you've got to run the business as if it isn't going to sell. Yeah. So that's difficult. We brought an agency on board called Green Square, corporate finance company, who helped us prepare the company for sale, but we were in pretty good shape. Mm-hmm. You do a long list of potential buyers. So we put like Apple down and loads of fantasy stuff, and Nike, and they put sensible ones down like Accenture, and you end up with a short list of people who actually might buy it. Yeah. Who then you send out information memorandum to. Some of them will then sign NDAs, and then you potentially start to negotiate with them. So we had 4. We ended up with 4 that were genuinely interested and had signed the proper NDAs, and we were talking to them about a potential deal. Mm-hmm. That ended up with 2, and that was Accenture and Capita. And right up until the day where you actually do the deal, you're running the business as if it isn't going to be sold. Yeah. And that's really hard. Yeah. You don't tell anyone. So my wife knew, Mike's wife knew, 3 staff maybe. Right. Because you can't. Yeah. Because the minute word gets out that you're for sale,
it's going to change, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. Yeah. So a really, really difficult time, quite stressful in case it doesn't go through, I guess. Yeah. But, we ultimately chose Capita for a whole bunch of reasons that I won't go into. Not all. Ultimately, Accenture looked like we would just get absorbed into Accenture Interactive very, very quickly, which we would have done. Probably would have still been the right thing to do. Capita offered us the chance to kind of modernize all of their software. So Capita Software was the second biggest software company in the UK behind Sage at the time, and owned Blue Light all the Blue Light software. Most secondary schools ran on Capita's software called Sims. Huge, but they didn't have a digital agency type function that the likes of Accenture and IBM and everybody else had. So we thought, well, this is our chance to be that. We went with them, and it was a great deal financially. It could have been a great deal for the business. I'm still very proud that we did it, but that's my last shot if you want to do it. Yeah. So that was about half an hour before we sold the company, which looks like we spent the afternoon in the pub. We got to this stage and we left the office at about 1. Our wives went to the Malmaison and kind of waited for us there. We booked suites there on the basis that we were going to celebrate and have a meal and everything else. We thought it would be like an hour, sign everything, go and celebrate. Like 4 or 5 hours later, 6 o'clock, and we're still sitting in the lawyer's office. They've all disappeared. Turns out they were arguing about something with the other side. Right. That was their job. I mean, they were absolutely the right thing to do. but we just got bored, so we just went to the pub. And fortunately, I asked somebody to take that photo, and I'm so pleased it did, because it did capture a little moment in time of we didn't know what was happening. You know, we genuinely didn't. We didn't know if we were going to walk out of there and not sell the company. It was very possible at that point.
Right.
It was a point. It was a clause in the SPA, the share purchase agreement, that if they didn't get a deal on, we couldn't sign, basically. Right. The lawyers just said you'd be mental, too risky.
Yeah.
And the other side went budging at that point. So it was a really strange time. And then I got a phone call from Paul, the lawyer, who was like, where are you two? And I was like, we're in the Dog and Parrot. And he went, what the fuck are you doing in the Dog and Parrot? He says, if you come back pissed, I can't let you sign anyway. Like that would be irresponsible. You have to be able to cognitively understand what you're doing. So, please come back. So we went back, and he did a great, unbelievable job. You know, they really do look after you. They work hard. They work really, I think, hard for us, but God, those lawyers work phenomenal hours. And
like you said earlier, having the right people on your side.
Oh, you've got to, yeah. Would have been really easy to let. But I guess that's what their reputation is, right? Yeah. That's why you use them.
Yeah.
So yeah, we did the deal. It was about 9 o'clock at night in the end. Might have even been. I'm sure we didn't get the Malmez on about 10. So the girls were suitably refreshed anyway by then. And they'd actually thought that maybe it wasn't going to happen by then, you know, because you really just don't know. So I am really proud of that moment. It was hard going in the office on the Monday and telling everybody, I have to be honest. You know, that I remember one member of the team in particular looked absolutely devastated, like she'd been betrayed. Yeah. And I'll never forget the look on her face. Because, you know, when you're talking to a room of 60, 70 people, there was some dialed in from London, like on the webcam or whatever, you do scan the room looking at people's faces, and then whenever I'm doing a talk, I always seem to focus on the one person who's shaking their head or whatever. And she just looked distraught. Yeah. And not everybody wanted to work for a corporate. Yeah. And for good reason. But ultimately we made the decision, and I think, you know, it went okay for a while. But the whole landscape changed. Capita are predominantly an outsourcing company. So they run local councils and they run the BBC audience, like, what do they call it, audience relations or something? You know, they run the TV license, all that stuff. If you want to book tickets for Strictly, you ultimately go through a Capita bit of software, which we ended up writing. But they're predominantly an outsourcing business, and Carillion went bust after about 6 months of us being signed to Capita. Everything was going all right at that point, and then Carillion went bust, and the whole outsourcing world just collapsed. I mean, you know, the stock market is not best known for its resilience in the face of a trauma like that, and the Capita share price dropped from like £14 to 12 pence or something. You know, the market capitalisation from 7 billion to hundreds of millions. I mean, it was fairly catastrophic. So obviously the landscape within Capita changed, and we had to try and adapt within that. And it was really difficult then, because that was not the deal we'd done. Yeah. Not by any fault of anybody's that was involved in the deal. Yeah. But suddenly Capita became much more focused on saving money. Still owed us a lot of money at that point, personally. Though we did end up in reasonable kind of arguments and conflict for quite a long time, because we were trying to protect our earn-out. When you tend to sell something for a lot of money, you have a deferred consideration based on certain targets. So that was really difficult. And, you know, we went from thinking that this was like the end game, as in this was the bit that we would really enjoy and leave a great legacy behind, to having 2 or 3 years of conflict, to be honest. Really, really challenging. But, you know, you live by your decisions, don't you? Mike and I personally did fine out of it. And we have to be honest about that. The business was at 150 people at its peak, and Capita ultimately absorbed it into their consultancy division in the end, and pretty much lost all of their staff. Most of them disappeared off. They were brilliant. We'd spent 10, 15 years building up a team of what we thought the most talented people available. And that's really, really hard to do. That's why big companies acquire smaller companies, because you acquire amazing talent. Yeah. But it needs to be looked after. Yeah. And I did genuinely pick up the phone to my boss one day and say, everyone's going to leave. if we carry on like this. They don't need this shit. These are some of the most talented people I've ever worked with. They can go anywhere. Yeah. And you can't take away the benefits. The things we built up. Yeah. You know, we used to we had a party planning committee that had like a 20 grand budget a year, and they could do what they wanted with it. Mike and I weren't involved. Mm-hmm. Literally, I'd go and spend that money on whatever. And the capitalists want to take all of that away. That's not can't do that anymore. Our expenses policy was one line in the contract that said, "Don't take the piss," and we meant it. Mm-hmm. And you know what? People didn't. Yeah. Right. So when we used to say, we spend our lives on that East Coast Main Line. I used to say, go first class, just don't go peak time. Yeah. So go and have a couple of pints before you come home, and then go first class. And it's cheaper anyway than travelling back standard class on a peak ticket. And if you're working away for 5 days and you eat in your hotel room for 3, then go and have a cracking meal and take your pal out who lives in that city on the company at the end of it. And whereas you go to Capita and the expenses policy is like that, and there was different amounts you could spend in different cities around Europe, and you know what happens then? Everybody just goes for the maximum they can get away with. So our expenses bill went up despite the fact that it had more rules in place, and you couldn't go first class anymore. And everyone just got a standard open standard ticket, which is like 400 quid, because that was more convenient for them, because there was no upside for them to do anything else. So why would they? So you change the way that you deal with people, and it ultimately changes the environment where they're working. Mm-hmm. And it did start and have an impact on the business. We tried very hard for as long as we could to put an umbrella over them and to shield them. Yeah. So we had a secret room in the building that Capita, I don't think we're ever aware that we owned or we leased. It wasn't identified specifically on the document, and that was where the bar was, and the pool table and the video games, and because we knew that they'd stripped all of that out of a different company that they'd acquired. We tried really hard to protect them, but ultimately, like I say, talent can go wherever it wants, can't it? And
did they not see that actually by doing that they were kind of ruining the very thing that they'd bought? I mean,
it's just a common story, unfortunately. Yeah. And I think because in their defence, because their world was suddenly, Capita was fighting for its absolute existence. There's no doubt about that. Mm. We just weren't important anymore. Mm. Really, we might have been part of a strategic direction that they were going to take when they acquired us. Yeah. 6 months later, it was survival mode, and where can we generate some cash from to keep the business going, really? So I have some sympathy. I'm not saying that they did a terrible job, but yeah, they made some decisions that I disagree with. They offshored the entire IT, everything they had in terms of technical ability within the group, which was thousands of people working on Capita software. They offshored to India. Mm. And we had a veto. We said, we're not doing that. It'll affect our earnouts. So all of our people were protected. Mm. But that was not successful. Mm. Just because I was chatting to somebody yesterday, who I won't quote, but he'd worked with somebody who we were working with at this time at Capita, who used to be at Oracle, who said that they did the same in Oracle, and it might be 5 times cheaper, but it takes 6 times longer. So you don't gain anything. Better off. And actually what you find is a lot of talent is being laid off. A lot of knowledge. 10 years of working on a product suddenly has walked out the door. So I disagreed with the way that they were doing a lot of things. For all I have some sympathy, I think we could have done it better, if I'm brutally honest. We should have just given the whole software division to us, and we would have done a much better job. We would have modernised it for sure, rather than going back to a tactic that maybe worked in the 80s. Yeah. So yeah, really frustrating, I've got to be honest. But you live and learn, and you make your decisions, and we were always aware that it could go wrong. Yeah. We weren't naive enough to think it was all going to be sort of flowers and sunshine.
And that was what, 7-8 years ago now?
It's to 2016. 2016 we did the deal, and 2020 I left.
Right.
So we negotiated in the end to finalise an earn-out, and at that point they then had total control, and there wasn't much point in me hanging around then. I'd brought in a CEO to run the business by then anyway, so I spent most of my time arguing with the people above me, so they were probably quite happy for me to go. By then I was probably just became a pain in the arse. And Mike had broadly checked out by then anyway. Mentally, he wasn't enjoying it either. Neither of us were probably easy to manage. We probably weren't naturally great employees, which is why we'd end up running our own business.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah.
So we couldn't make it out. Unfortunately, now this is not a sob story, but I had all these plans. So I resigned in 2020, February 2020. I was going to go to California and see Turin, who used to be she was our creative director. I was going to go out there, visit her, maybe see if there was any events on I could go to, do a bit of traveling, go to Web Summit again. I was going to do all the big conferences and see what was going on. And of course, March 2020, the world shut down.
Everything changed, yeah.
So I probably had the easiest pandemic out of anybody. Don't get me wrong. I didn't have any money worries, really. Everything was fine. I didn't have a job, but I wasn't getting paid. But I had a lovely time with my family. And, we had a nice house, garden, and we're near the beach. So our 1 hour of government sanctioned exercise a day was pleasant. But it did mean that actually my career kind of just really stopped dead. Because I don't think you can start something new. Well, I certainly wasn't in the mental place to go and do something new from my bedroom.
Yeah.
So that's a bit frustrating. But yeah, world's smallest violin probably compared to what most people went through in the pandemic, right?
But did you eventually then, get through that phase and do the kind of things you wanted to do?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, what I've really enjoyed since kind of getting back into work, if you like, is doing the board advisory stuff,
right.
mentoring, board advisory work. Done some independent stuff, done some stuff for Creative UK, part of the Entrepreneurs Forum up here. Quite enjoyed that. It's been quite nice imparting some experience for people.
Yeah.
So yeah, enjoyed that. The guys, so Mike, Chris and James. James was the CEO I brought into Orange Bus when we first sold the Capita. James came from a large consultancy background. He'd worked for BT and NG. So he was great at that sort of relationship management with our overlords, if you like. So those three have started, the four of us have started a new business called Dynamic Path, which owns 50% of a software company, which I'm super excited about. That is in the manufacturing space. So it's called Therion, and that is basically improving efficiency and giving people in manufacturing and engineering real-time data. So bizarrely, it's like a full circle for me, having come from ERP and factory stuff.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that the success already that's having. I mean, 6 months to a year in, really, it is looking really exciting. Some great big clients on board already. The opportunity there is huge. Yeah. So that's amazing. We also have a stake in a company called Land Digital, which is up the road from here. Yeah. They do tolling software for time tunnel. And they've just run another one in that space. So as well as being a digital agency. So really enjoying working with those guys as well. I made the decision to not do it full time. So the other three are very much all in.
Right.
And working incredibly hard. And it didn't seem fair that I wasn't doing that to then expect the same. So for all I'm working with them, I'm also doing other things as well, which is just perfect for me.
Yeah.
I don't have any huge desire to do 60-hour weeks anymore. I'm kind of done with that.
So you're not planning on starting a gin distillery or a...
No, nah. Honestly, you know what it is? I had loads of ideas. There was a time where I wanted to open a garage. I really fancied doing like a high-end custom car garage.
Okay.
I would have fancied that. And which would have been stupid. I would have definitely needed to get another job if I'd done that, because I would have been broke by now probably. I wanted to open a record shop at one point until my wife told me I would be bored within like a week. She's right, so I didn't do that either. You have silly ideas, but the reality is, to be honest, I like using my brain. I still think I've got, another 10 years in me yet.
Yeah, at least.
And I'm enjoying getting back into it again. But what I didn't want to do was to go all in on one thing, because there's still other opportunities out there. There's, I may well go down the acquisition route. There's a friend of mine called David Lynch, who has been really successful. He's bought, I think, 3 or 4 companies in the last year, and he's rolling them up together and doing something there. That looks really exciting. I like that idea. So I'm exploring that with another friend of mine. But nothing may come of that as well. I'm really just open to seeing what happens. And that's why, for all, I'm really enjoying working with my 3 old friends, if you like, again at Dynamic Path. it's also really nice being open to other things happening.
Yeah.
You know, to bring it back to earlier on in the conversation, keep my eyes open for those lucky stumbles, if you like, and see. And you know what? If nothing comes up, I can give the guys a dynamic path all the time they need, and get plenty of rewards for doing that. And you know, and I'll be quite happy. But it's nice to be in a position for the first time in my life where I don't have to do anything, you know, straight away.
And you have got another bus project to focus on, is that right?
Yeah, I have. So we are 7 years into the build. So I should have brought a picture of
Is that 7 years into a 2-year project?
Yeah. Don't say, because if the guy who's building it sees it, she'll kill me.
I wouldn't cut that out.
No, it's fine. So we, well, you know, as the pandemic got in the way of that as well.
Yeah.
And then Jay, the guy who's the engineer who's working on this with me or for me, then damaged his arm in a BMX accident. Took him working it for like a year and a half. So this van's been in bits for 7 years now. But yeah, it's going to be amazing. Goes into paint in April. It's we have a 911 3.2 litre.
I was going to say, it's not a faithful restoration of the original vehicle, is it?
No, it's the chassis being custom built to take the power. It is heavily engineered. It will look identical to what it did 7 years ago.
As it flies past at a phenomenal speed.
Nobody will know. But you know what? I'd wanted to do that. It was the first decision I made after we sold the company, because I felt like the van had been part of the business, part of our success. It was part of my family. We went camping in it all the time. You know, my wife was as big a part of the story as my business partner, really, because without your family supporting you, you can't do these things. And she left her career to look after the kids, because I was working 60 to 80 hours a week, never home, traveling, entertaining clients, whatever it was. She's at home with the kids. Not great, really, and she had a great career. So I just felt like that was something that was really important to us as a family. We took the kids away camping in it, all of them at all ages. And I had so many happy memories from a personal level as well as a company one, that it just seemed kind of the right thing to do. Didn't think it was going to take 7 years. So, I mean, my eldest boy, who's now 18, helped me dismantle the van. He was 11. And I've got those photos, and you think, he's not going to get much fun out of it. But the thought was there. And I'll still enjoy it. And I have another 11-year-old now, so hopefully we'll get some fun with him.
And you never, when this red is red, is it? So
it is red.
When the red bus is finished, who knows? It might be the catalyst for
something else.
Some new venture in the way that breaking down on the coast road.
Maybe, hopefully this one won't break down after what we've done to it. It might. I would hope not. But yes, who knows? You can't necessarily look for the opportunity. If you look really, really hard for opportunity, as in if you're out there going, I need to find an opportunity.
If it's desperation, then,
they tend not to come. But if you open your horizons up a little bit, put yourself out of your comfort zone, go to things that you might not necessarily want to go to, hang out with people that aren't your best 3 friends in the world, then you never quite know what comes. And that's my focus for the next few years, is to do those things and see what happens, really. And be there to support my family. And as much as I can, as well as they're all, the kids are growing up. Have some fun with my wife after all the years of challenge that we had.
Well, when this new project is finished, we'll send us some photos and we'll post them somewhere. And who knows, as I say, who knows where that might lead to.
Indeed.
Julian, it's been great.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us.
I love talking about myself, so this is never a problem.
Well, I
could have gone on all day.
Well, I do choose guests on that basis, that they're good at talking about themselves, but that's what we want to hear about. So
thanks very much. Cheers. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Julian, for that. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So do join me again for another episode of Northern Spotlights. But before you do that, please don't forget to subscribe. We want to get those numbers up, and it does mean that you'll be informed when the next episode lands. So don't forget to press that button.